Let me ask you just a practical question, because you're also a single mom, am I right?
Yes.
So you're a single mom, you're a business owner, you've had a very successful career, and you're homeschooling. How are you doing all of that?
You don't sleep. Lots of coffee.
Welcome to the Future of Education podcast, hosted by MacKenzie Price. MacKenzie is the founder of a revolutionary new school model that's disrupting education through AI. Join us as we discuss the latest in education innovation.
So Claire, you're not only homeschooling your 7-year-old, but you've really become a leader and an influencer in this homeschooling movement. And you probably talk to all these homeschooling parents. Why do you think homeschooling is something that people are flocking to?
I think there's a general disdain and dislike for the current education system. I believe a lot of people are unsatisfied with their school districts, their school systems, and they're looking for something else.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think they're seeing the flexibility that homeschooling allows and the fact that their children don't need to be in school for 6-7 hours a day, really being sort of babysat. And if they have the ability to not have them in a classroom and travel, see the world, experience life, I think they're far happier.
Sorry, let me ask you just a practical question, because you're also a single mom, am I right?
Yes.
So you're a single mom, you're a business owner, you've had a very successful career, and you're homeschooling. How are you doing all of that?
You don't sleep. Lots of coffee. And I don't like being on social media in front of my son. So
good for you.
Not a lot of sleep is really truthfully. I mean, look, if you're going to homeschool and you're doing it, especially as a single parent or even anybody, it's not completely easy. You're going to have challenges, and finding your groove is going to take some time, but you can do it and you just have to make sacrifices. I used to live in LA. And I realized living there away from family, away from a huge support system was not going to be conducive to me homeschooling.
Okay.
So I made a massive change.
You were clear in your priority. I'm going to homeschool my son. And you're like, I realize I have to make some shifts. Yeah. I think you and I kind of have something in common, because when I was dissatisfied with my kids' traditional education system, I was like, something's got to change. It's got to be different. And I would talk to my friends. I'd be like, does this not bother you? And it was amazing. Some of them were like, oh, I don't know. I mean, it's just what it is.
It is what it is.
And I was like, no, there's got to be something different. Where we're different is I knew I was not equipped to homeschool my kids. I'm like, I am definitely, I can't do that. And so I was like, okay, I got to go start a school. And I think a lot of times I'll hear people, and I'm sure you hear the same thing, like, how do you go do that? Like, that takes a lot. You're right. It does take a lot, but these are our children. This is like the most important product that we are like growing in life, and we need to make those decisions and sacrifices.
I mean, I think what you did was phenomenal. I didn't think to go build a school. I just thought to homeschool. So
there are different things. Everyone chooses their hard, right? And hard either way. But I'm like homeschooling. I think
I can't do that. I'll just build a school.
Yeah.
But no, but I think the reality is, I think children are overlooked a lot. Like, I truly believe in our society, I really think children are overlooked. They're just sort of passed by as they go to school 8 hours a day, come home, parents work hard. They don't have anything to invest them later on. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they come out all right. And that's that.
They're also underrated.
Underrated, 100%.
They're taught. I think it's like our society right now kind of treats kids as like, we just got to get them taken care of. And then over time, and that's one of the fundamental things. It's like kids are limitless, and we have to provide them with an environment that helps unlock that potential. That's like the mission of my schools.
Right.
And I think a lot of homeschooling parents think 100%. That too, right?
Yeah. But you have to think of this too. In order for you to create your own school and for me to homeschool on my own and other parents to make that decision, you're taking on a lot of responsibility.
Oh, I had a full-time job when I was starting this whole project. Like, I was working and doing something else. There is a lot of responsibility, but you're right. There's responsibility to that child.
And I think in doing that, taking that responsibility away from an external force or an external being, institution, whatever it is, makes you really invest in what it is. And that being your child should be your number one child.
Okay. So back when you were being homeschooled, you were talking about back then it was like weird people homeschooled, or it was like religious people homeschooled or something. And I think that was even true in the, 2000s and stuff. But recently there has been a change in the wave of the type of people who are homeschooling. What do you think that change is?
Well, first, I think COVID opened a lot of people's eyes. I hate to say the big C word, but the fact that a lot of people hated the online, said they couldn't do it, but a lot of people saw just how much or how little their children were actually learning.
Their schools were. I know.
Have you seen children's handwriting at 12, 13? I was taught cursive as a kid, right? Like I had to learn cursive, I had to learn Latin, and that was being unschooled, homeschooled. Yeah. But I think people really opened their eyes, but in doing that, they saw, hey, wait a minute, if I'm not running around moving my child from point A to point B 24/7, stuck in the carpool lines, and I can be home with them, focus on them, I'm a little less stressed out.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little bit more confident about where my child is.
Yeah.
And I think it just took a minute there to make everyone start to see. And we were also forced to develop resources, right? I don't know when you started your school, but
2014.
Okay. Well, you were ahead of the game. But we were forced to develop more resources amongst the homeschooling, alternative schooling, world schooling, whatever you want to call it, the non-public school environment, to sort of come together and say, we're going to do it different. This generation is not going to be the same as the others. So let's build. And that wave has been just building, astronomically. There's so much out there. The whole, homeschool kids aren't social, they're not socialized. I think that is a line to try to trick you to put your children in public school, because I have so many social events every week.
I get the same thing all the time, which is, where's the socialization? Your kids are learning through a computer. Where's the socialization? And I'm like, okay, first of all, just take aside the fact that our kids are only having to spend 2 hours a day and they're getting a way more engaged academic experience versus sitting in class. But what world do we think the socialization that's happening in traditional school is reasonable? It's like, here's the socialization, mostly sit in class, generally being quiet.
Right.
Usher quickly from classroom to classroom if you can, be told what to do. And I think it's that idea of and adopt the traditional social norms, which is, hey, if you're a jock, you're cool. If you're a cute person, you might be popular, you could be a nerd, you could be a whatever. And it's like, those are the things. And I remember before I started this school, back in probably 2013, as I was just learning, I read this book, Unschooling Rules, that short book. But one of the things it said was, we think of so much of our socialization as just rite of passage. And we realize so much of it is negative socialization. Like, do you really need to get shoved up against the school locker in order to learn how to deal with bullies?
But that right there is what I hear all the time. How's my child going to understand how to deal with bullies and relate in the real world? I've never really been bullied. I've never really seen any peer pressure. I was a #1 sales rep in the country. My brother is in a very high level sales career. He's a director in sales. And we were not raised in the school system. We had our peers, we had friends who were older, friends who were younger. We were raised in a very diverse cultural system.
A rich social environment where you're having so much more interaction. I totally agree. And my response to those same things, which is, I'll get this now, it's a very common thing, which is, if your kids end up going to college, traditional college, then they're going to have to learn about sitting in class. And I'm like, fine, just because they're learning then, why should we make them do that earlier? Or, they need to learn how to deal with peer pressure. It's like, so we should put them in peer pressure environments earlier where they're this. It's like, why are we boiling the frog, early?
Right.
Like, how about we let our kids fully bake and develop as people, and then they're better equipped to go out in the world and deal with those things.
And that's exactly what happens. Once you set some foundations during your early, most impressionable years, then those social pressures don't really influence you as much. I remember being at parties or wherever in college and not being influenced by anything anyone else was doing and not being worried about it and not caring. So, I fully believe that homeschooling is on the rise. It's here to stay. Alternative schooling, other methods of education outside of what we've all seen traditionally. And I lump in Catholic schools, Christian schools, those type of private schools on the same sort of education sphere as as public schools, because it's still the same curriculum type.
Yeah, same model.
Same model.
That's how I felt.
Yeah.
It wasn't about private school versus public school.
No.
It's like we need a different model of education
100%.
on that. And it's there. How many of the people that reach out to you about homeschooling are fleeing the system because they're concerned about like woke school policies or any of that stuff? How big of a thing do you hear that to be?
I'd say it's pretty 50-50, to be honest. I hear a ton of people who are fleeing woke policies, but it's not just woke policies. To me, it's more the system in which people are being taught. They do not want their children sitting in school for 1 million hours a day, not knowing even what they're really learning.
Right.
And again, there's also school safety they're concerned with. And I think that's a huge part, but I also think it's a little bit bipartisan, because a lot of the people who take their children out of school, whether they're on the right or the left, they want a good education for their children. And that's really what a lot of it boils down to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, woke is a big issue, and I think that did deter a lot of people as well, but it deterred both sides, though.
Sure.
People just want a good education for their kids.
Well, I love to hear that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about how you became a homeschooling, like, social media character and presence. Did you set out to do this, or were you just kind of for fun documenting your journey on Instagram?
So it's kind of funny. I was living in Dallas, and where I lived, there were no homeschoolers in my immediate area. There were, if I drove a little ways, I'd find my groups and such. But where I was specifically, homeschooling was not the thing. It was send your child to private school. The private schools straight to the next private, the private undergrads, to the high schools, to the college was the path. And everybody I knew would ask, when are you going to put your child in school? When are you going to put your kid in school? Which was kind of a funny thing, because they all knew I was homeschooled. So it's like, we love you, you're amazing, but you can't do that twice.
Get your kid in school.
Yeah, can you put him in school, please? And I just thought that was such a weird thing. And in my sort of rebuttal to those questions and comments constantly, I just said, you know what, I'll just start posting about homeschooling.
Okay.
It's what I know.
You were like going to educate people too,
and
a
I
little
educate,
bit.
but not even, and I wouldn't just post about how to or the books to use, the curriculums. I'd post what we did. Like, oh, we're going to a glass blowing seminar. So we're going to go and learn at 6 years old how metals and glasses and different elements work in a fire. And people are like, whoa, you could do that with him at 6? Or I went to a blacksmithing thing, and, we stayed in a Conestoga wagon to learn about, early settlers. And people just started looking at it and saying, wait a minute, this is what homeschooling is? Wait, you're not just sitting at home teaching your child
you're not just homeschooling kids in math. You're actually doing that plus sharing these great adventures.
Right. So I think I started doing that, and then sort of sharing my perspective on how I viewed things, and sharing a lot of, great tips, not tips so much as how to homeschool, but a great perspective on the education system.
Right?
Yeah.
Inspiration, what
so
you said.
So that's basically all it was. And then it just grew.
So I know one of your biggest reels is all about childhood play. Why do you think that hits and resonates?
Well, there's so much structure in the world that I think when we allow children to experience unstructured play on their own, and especially outside in nature, I think they really can explore their own boundaries, their limitations, their fears, their own creativity. I truly think we've sort of moved so far away from existing in one's own self and sort of finding the space to learn on your own, the quiet, that experience is something children really thrive in. That moment of, how can I create an environment, an imaginary world on my own, with or without other children around? If there are other children, fantastic. You're learning how to interact with them and build them into your own world. But that play environment, I think, is just limitless for developing children.
Yeah.
Throw them in a room with a couple boxes, just see what happens. I mean, you've probably done that.
We have absolutely done that. And, it's crazy. I'm sure you had this experience. I think every parent probably did. You spend all this time, picking out some toy for your child, and they ended up playing with the box more than the toy that was inside the box.
Yeah, our play.
Now they're turning that into like forts and tree houses and things like that. It's totally true.
But I mean, look at that. You use forts, you're using scissors, you're using tape measures, you're using tape. You're creating so much. And I think that hands-on active play, I mean, that's play.
Yep.
And then we're not being guided. I actually think Legos, the way they are now, sort of deterred
completely
from play, from creative play. I mean, you get a book, it tells you A through B, whatever.
And you know what? Half the time, I feel like I see the parents end up putting the Lego sets together, right, for their kids. And yeah, versus just like, hey, just play. I didn't even know that Legos were like really supposed to be what the cover of the box was. I just was like, well, because I was like, there's no world where I'm actually going to figure out how to make that. So I'll make something else. They usually turned into some sort of like Star Wars spaceship general themed creation.
But they literally took the creativity out of it by saying, here's what you get. Here's a box. I mean, it was a great marketing thing, but they said, this is what you're building. And that's it. I mean, my brother and I used to take Legos and see who could build the most indestructible structure and throw it off something.
That's a great idea.
And see where it would go. I mean, that was it. So
your Instagram channel, it's called LiveLeafLearn.
Yes.
What's the inspiration behind that?
Well, honestly, my mom inspired it. I lean on my parents for everything, but she inspired it. But it's really what we do. We live life. He's with me. I was talking to someone earlier that he's with me all the time. I mean, yes, I have nights where I can take off and have a babysitter or family watch him. But the majority of the time, he's with me. He's come to work with me. He's come to podcast studios with me. I mean, he is living life, actually out there living life with me and learning what it's about. And then the other part of it is that we spend so much time in our outdoor environment, right? So I am a big fan of this because I needed it as a kid. With my energy, I needed the outdoors, the outside to burn it and try to have some ability to focus. So we are always out in nature. I mean, we're catfishing on a Friday night. We are out hiking at least 3 times a week. So that's part of just our education,
and
our school system.
And it's such a fundamental thing that's missing in traditional schools, right? Is just being outside and getting to have real playtime. I saw a DM that came through that was talking about like, they get 1 recess a day for like, 16 minutes or something. And these are kindergartners, first graders being expected to sit there all day. It's like,
right.
It's ridiculous.
And you think about it, your school's beautiful here, but like when you look at the schools, they're usually pretty closed in, not nearly as many windows.
They're so depressing.
The sunlight's not
depressing.
there.
Yeah, it's very sad. I think, school buildings were kind of built, I think, by the same architects as a lot of prisons, right? We've known, and homeschooling is known forever, that it doesn't take all day to educate kids. And so there's a connection with 2-hour learning. And with the rest of the day, what are kids free to do? How can they go explore their passions and their interests? And that's through a variety of things. It's through play. It's through these workshops. It's through developing life skills, which, you're helping your kid develop. Homeschoolers are doing a good job. I have one question about homeschooling.
Yeah.
And I will say this is probably based on some of my personal experience with homeschoolers that I have known, homeschooling parents that I've known. And I'm curious what you think about this. Sometimes I feel like homeschooling lacks the rigor and lacks maybe the high standards for what a kid can do. I feel like a lot of the homeschoolers that I've interacted with in the last 10 years have been more focused on like, our kid is graduating and they'll go on and do a little community college stuff or whatever,
right.
But they're not necessarily like trying to head to, elite universities, which there's a whole other conversation about elite universities, but
in theory,
there's definitely a whole thing, but it just in general. Do you think that I'm wrong, or do you think there is something there?
I think it can be misconstrued a lot. I think because there is a fundamental understanding that unschooling has been successful, which is, again, this is a term I don't love, but it's letting the child lead their education naturally, which can be different paths, okay? So it can look a little bit more relaxed, but in the same sense, I personally have seen what people call more relaxed, sort of not as strict, to me, seems to have made leaps and bounds towards creating more structure. Because again, I'm coming from an era where we were feral.
Yeah.
I mean, I was riding, hay wagons and ducking under power lines. That was, PE. So I think when I look at what people are doing now, and I'm thinking of one of my good friends who homeschools or unschools, she does math in the morning. She does reading. She does a lot more than we really think about, even though her attitude towards it is they'll learn when they learn. But they're very advanced. They're not doing this strict unschooling, let them be feral sort of thing. Yeah. But I also think there is a push away from trying to go to these. I mean, it's a tricky thing trying to go to these highly academic schools that my era thought everyone should go to.
Right.
My sister went to an Ivy League school. That was what we were grained in our head. We need to go to these schools.
Yeah.
So I think what you may be referring to is kind of this idea that we're pushing away from going to colleges that we might not see as much value in.
Totally.
So there is, now I know that's a huge argument to be had. It's not a popular take, but I think what we are seeing instead is a push towards entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
At least what I see in the homeschool community. I know you've taken that leaps and bounds ahead, which is why homeschoolers like this school in particular. Yeah. But I think that's sort of what we're looking at more.
I think where it probably falls, and this is true with homeschooling and with what we're doing, is we want to turn kids out who are prepared and able to do whatever they want to do. And if that means they want to go to an Ivy League university, then they should be able to get into one. And if that means they want to go straight into the business world or, do something else or take a gap year and just travel, like they should be prepared to do all of those things. Right. And I hope to hear that that's what homeschooling is also saying is let's give kids the critical thinking skills, the values, and the ability to be creative, and then say, hey, this is the path that's right for me.
Well, traditionally, homeschool children have excelled in all the standardized testing. When you look at it, they're usually scoring above all the public schools kids. So, I mean,
a lot of people are scoring above
that's
public school kids, right? It's
that's
really
true.
Crazy how bad it really has gotten. Well, one thing you mentioned, Claire, is like, it does take a lot of work. You don't get a lot of sleep. You have to be dedicated, all of that. So for that parent that's out there listening and thinking, should I homeschool? So far, like it sounds cool, but that also sounds like a lot of work. And she literally says it's a lot of work. And I don't know that I want to go start my own school like MacKenzie did. What is the advice that you would have for that parent?
So the first thing you have to do is find a community.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and there are communities everywhere. They usually congregate on Facebook. So if you just put homeschool and then your town, you'll find 100 different places. And the best thing about communities is they share resources. Even your 2-hour learning is shared. Mm-hmm. The idea of learning like that is shared. People talk about different concepts of education, right? So you're sharing resources with people that really takes away a lot of the pressure. So my son has virtual classes he takes, mm-hmm. right? We have a community where we go and have a STEM class on Tuesdays. So there's a lot of resources to be had out there where I'm not actually teaching him.
Yeah.
I don't really have much patience to teach all the time. So I think finding a community is one, and then getting familiar with what's out there for options, because although homeschooling for me is a full-time experience, there are micro schools, there mm-hmm. are adventure schools, there's nature schools, there's play-based schools.
There's part-time
homeschool
schools where you're, go to school a couple days a week and you're home a few days a week. There's all kinds of things like that.
So many more options than public and the traditional private schools that I just think people haven't thought to look into.
Yeah. I think that's true. Well, I'm excited to hear that the network is there. We're launching our homeschooling program sometime in the next couple of months. We've been doing a little bit of not reworking. We're still putting the final touches on that, but I'll be excited to share that with the homeschooling community.
It takes a bit to try to do it all on your own when it comes to homeschooling. And I think having a program that gives you an idea of how to get through just 2 hours a day mm-hmm. of education with your child, depending on what age they are, is a relief. Really. I mean, give me 2 hours of education for my son, and as soon as he's done, we can go play. That sounds great.
We're really going to enable people to outsource that part of homeschooling, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things with the homeschooling community is, it's a lot of moms, mm-hmm. dads out there too, but they're pouring a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that time at home, and they're not always thinking about here's things we can also be doing. And I hope that what 2-hour learning will do is provide sort of another resource for those mm-hmm. parents to be able to say, hey, I can know that my kid's getting a really great academically rigorous where they're learning this great experience with good results in that short period of time.
Right.
And then what I hope is that parents will be able to take the rest of the time to go do all those cool adventures and teach those life skills.
So we'll let you have the responsibility of the curriculum, the academic part, and then I'll have the fun.
I think that's a great way to do it.
Works for me.
Claire, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for coming to my podcast studio, traveling to Austin to get together. It's really fun to meet you in real life because I do feel like I know you from social media.
I know. And thank you for having me. I've referenced your school as being innovative and incredible. And I'm so glad I'm finally here seeing it in person so I can feel confident talking about it more.
Amazing. Well, keep crushing the education of your son and keep inspiring all these other homeschool parents too.
Thank you.
All right, that wraps up this episode of Future of Education. Thanks so much to Claire Denault, who is an awesome, dedicated mother of this young 7-year-old homeschooling kid. It's so cool. You have got to go follow her adventures in homeschooling at live.leaf.learn. It's actually also just a really beautiful compilation of, again, the adventures that she's able to bring her son on as part of their homeschooling journey. And of course, you can always reach out to me on social media. You can go to Future of Education on Instagram or YouTube and check out more of our podcasts. If you have not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and I'll be back in your feed soon. Until next time, just remember, kids are limitless and it is our job to help unlock that potential.